Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Gina, and let's talk about plants. Okay, so in today's video is going to be another one of my videos about plant care. I started a new series on my channel, the Plant Care series. This will be the second video in the series. I plan to do lots of these. Last time we looked at the Mandula pothos. This time we are going to be looking at the Syngonium mojito. Okay, so if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I have a lot of Syngonium in my collection. This entire wall behind me on the pink trellis is filled with Syngonium. I just love the Syngonium. They're one of my very favorite genuses of plants. So I had to decide which one of these am I going to pick to highlight. And this one, the Syngonium mojito, has just really been a star lately. It's really been standing out. It's really been catching my attention. So this is what we're going to be looking at. This is what we're going to be learning about. So I'll take you through all the plant care for this Syngonium. We'll talk about prices of these plants, what I paid for this plant. I think it was last year, or maybe, yeah, I think it was last spring that I acquired this one. We'll see how much I paid for it, what they're going for now, and then general plant care, like lighting for these plants, watering, humidity, and fertilizing, and then last but not least, we're going to propagate this plant together. So yeah, that's what we have in store today. Okay, so the first thing we're going to take a look at is pricing on these plants. So I looked it up and I purchased this plant back in May of 2022. So I have had this a year and a half, I guess, May, June, July, August, September, October, almost a year and a half I've had this plant in my collection. Now don't be fooled thinking, what? It's not very big for having this plant for only a year, or for having it for a year and a half, which seems like a really long time. Well, this plant used to be much larger. It actually used to be up here on the trellis, and I had taken it down one day because I was treating for pests, and the stem on it broke. So I was forced to start all over with this plant. I propagated all those stems, all those leaves and stems and nodes. I did propagate those. They are growing in my tent as we speak, but I was left with, this is what I was left with, like this little stem from the dirt, can you see that? From the dirt to here, this little cut, that was where the cut was made right there. Hopefully you can see it. That was all I had. It was just that little kind of stump that was left. No leaves, absolutely no leaves. And that was back in probably maybe June, maybe July, June or July, in the height of summer when I got hit with spider mites back here. That's when it happened. And I was treating, and like I said, it broke. The stem broke. So we went from no leaves and a stump to this in like 5 months? 4 or 5 months? So that's pretty good. So as you can see, this is a very fast grower. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So what I paid back on May 1st of 2022, I paid $52 for this plant. And that doesn't include shipping. So it was just $52, which is a lot of money. Now, I went and looked what they're going for today. There's kind of a big range, and this is on Etsy. I only checked on Etsy. They range from $15 to $40. When I took a quick look, that's what I saw. So $15 up to $40, depending on the size of the plant. The bigger plant is the $40. And then also, it was dependent on how much variegation the plant has. So the more variegation your plant has, the higher the price. So anywhere from $15 to $40. Now, I believe when I picked up this plant back on May 1st of 2022, mine did not look like this. It had much less variegation. So over time, for whatever reason, I was able to achieve this. I mean, if you can't spend a lot for the higher variegation, don't be afraid to go for lower variegation mojitos because you may end up with this at some point. So yeah, so that's basically what these are going for these days. Okay, so now let's talk about lighting requirements for this plant. So for all Syngoniums, they don't need super high bright light. Now, if you can give them bright light, they will appreciate it, but they can live in a lower light situation. Not a no light situation. They do need some light so they can grow, but they will do fine in a low light situation, but you won't, most likely, you won't be able to maintain this look. I think the brighter light is what gives you this really gorgeous high variegation in these leaves. So if you want to achieve this, give it as bright a light as you can, but it will live in lower light situation. It just won't thrive. So now this plant, I have this one sitting in a southeast, it's more like an east, southeast facing window. So, and it's right in front of the window. So it gets pretty decent light, especially in the morning and super early afternoon. It even gets some direct sunlight, which it can handle in the morning. Personally, I would not put this one in a south-facing window or a west-facing window in the middle of the afternoon because I'm sure you will run into problems with burning of the leaves, and then also you won't be able to keep up with the watering needs of this plant. You would probably have to water it every single day. So these guys like to stay wet, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Okay, so lighting, just anywhere from bright indirect light with a little bit of morning sun all the way down to a fluorescent light in an office. It will survive in that situation, it just won't thrive. So that's the lighting needs of this plant. Okay, so now let's delve into the watering needs of the Syngonium, and specifically the Syngonium mojito, which the Syngonium mojito is pretty much just like most of your Syngoniums, care-wise for like water, humidity, and all of that. It's like your basic, just your generic Syngonium. Even though it looks exotic and like it'd be more difficult, it's not. It's a basic Syngonium. So now there are some Syngoniums that we're not talking about today, but I will go into those at a later time, a later point, but those have a little bit different requirements from just your basic generic easy, super easy Syngonium plant. All right, so watering. Now, I said earlier that they like to stay wet. That's kind of true and kind of not true. So you don't want it to be constantly wet, but you want to, like, you never want to let it get more than the top 2 inches dried out, because when that happens, if this plant gets all the way dried out, you're going to get droopy leaves. And once those leaves are droopy, most likely you're not going to be able to save those leaves. They always, in my experience, they end up drooping, turning yellow, and eventually falling off. Even if you water the plant, the top ones, the newer leaves, are going to perk back up. They'll be fine. But your older leaves at the bottom, they are not going to be able to recover. And that's been my experience with pretty much every type of Syngonium I have in my collection. So yeah, so only allow like the first 2 inches of the pot to completely dry out and then water your plant again. You can use a moisture meter and you'll see like the top will be dry, but if you stick it lower down into the pot, it's going to show as moist or wet. I personally still water, even though it shows like down here in this area down here, it's still wet, but it's dry up here. I go ahead and water just so I don't lose. I try not to lose leaves if I can. I try not to lose those leaves from drying out too much. So yeah, I think that covers it. Now, water quality. If you can use filtered water, do that. Just because like in tap water, you're going to have your chlorine and chloramines that might affect the plants. I mean, if you have really poor water quality, you might want to think about using filtered water. I don't. I mean, we have pretty good water here in Colorado where I'm located. I just use tap water on all of my Syngoniums and they do fine. There's no like browning tips on the leaves. They are able to handle it. But we have really good water here, so I don't know, if you start noticing some browning of the leaves, that might be something you want to look into. Maybe it's your water quality. And in that case, maybe switch to filtered water and see if that makes a difference for you. So, but yeah, so that's watering requirements. Okay, so we're going to quickly touch on fertilizing for this plant, fertilizer. So personally, what I do is I fertilize twice a month. And I use Fox Farms Grow Big liquid fertilizer, which I add to my tap water when I'm watering my plant. So that's pretty much all I do. In the next topic, we're going to be talking about soil, and I do put worm castings in my soil mix, so it also is getting the nutrients from that. It does like a nice, rich, nutrient filled soil. So, okay, let's talk about soil. So Syngoniums in general, they like a bit more acidic soil. So, and I personally, I like to make my own mix for Syngoniums. So I will pick up a bag of, personally, I use Fox Farm Ocean Forest formula. So, you know, it has the peat moss in there to give the more acidity to the plant, which it prefers, and it has other things in it too. It has like perlite, and I'm not sure what else, and nutrients. It has nutrients in it. But I like to use that soil, but I like to amend it with orchid bark, charcoal. I add extra pumice, and then I also add extra nutrients. I will put worm castings into my mix, and that seems to work out really well. So I could be one who tends to overwater plants. So having a well-draining soil like that really helps me out. It saves me a lot. So yeah, so you're gonna have, like I said, you're gonna be having like the top 2 inches of your pot getting dry, but it's going to, that peat moss and other ingredients in that soil mix are going to retain some of the moisture down here, but then you still have that orchid bark and charcoal and pumice that's going to allow that water to mostly drain out, but still keeping it moist. It's kind of like a balance, a real balance of trying to keep it moist, but not too wet, and definitely not too dry. So I think what works best is just to go with like an aeroid mix for your plant. It's very chunky. What I use is very chunky. You can see all that chunk. It allows for air to get to those roots, but then at the same time it retains moisture. And I find myself watering this plant once a week. Regardless, once a week it gets watered. And this soil works well for that. This soil allows me to do that. So yeah. All right, so next up is humidity. Now, Syngoniums don't need super high humidity like most plants in your houseplant collection. Would they love high humidity? Definitely. The Syngonium definitely will respond to higher humidity with faster growth, but it doesn't need it. So most of my Syngonium. They're out in normal room conditions, and generally, like, my humidity in the house averages around 30%. In the summertime, it can go 40, 50%. Not too often, because actually it's more like in the springtime it can get up in the 40 to 50%, because that's when we get most of our rain. But for the most part, where I live in Colorado, it is dry. It is a very dry climate. So 30% is the average, I would say. Upper 20s, 30%, low 30s, not very humid. And they do great. Now, that's not the case for all Syngoniums. I mentioned previously that there are some that have kind of different requirements, and I will go into those at another time. But this one here, Syngonium mojito, it's your average Syngonium. It does fine with average humidity. So yeah, I think that's it. You can run a humidifier for them if you want. I don't typically. So yeah. Which leads us to our next topic of discussion with Syngonium, and that would be pests. Yay, pests! Pests! All right, so these guys are prone to pests, unfortunately, and mostly it seems to be spider mites. So actually, this is a good segue from going from humidity to pests, because if you know spider mites, you know they thrive in dry conditions. So when I was talking about a humidifier, you can add a humidifier to your plant, but it doesn't need it. But to keep your conditions more wet, more moist, which spider mites hate, it might be quite useful to you to use that humidifier to help you combat those spider mites. So these can also be affected by thrips. I have not had that happen, thank goodness. It's just been spider mites that I have been battling since June, I think. But you know what? Knock on wood, I think I might have conquered them. But yeah, so pests, mostly spider mites. Now, there's different things you can do to help your plant to fight those pests. Like I said, you can give it, the drier your environment, the more trouble you're going to have, especially with spider mites. So you can keep a moister environment for your plant, or you can go with pest treatments. Like you can use systemics. There's like granules you can sprinkle on your soil, and then the plant ingests that chemical, that pesticide, and the bugs are affected by that. Or you can go the liquid route. You know, there's some pesticides that are more harsh than others. I tend to lean towards the less toxic stuff if I can. So I personally have been using Azamax, which is still toxic, but it's supposed to be not as toxic. You can even use it on edible plants, and it's supposed to be safe. I don't know if I trust that. Yeah, I don't trust that. I mean, it probably is true, but I am more of a pessimistic type person, so I wouldn't take that chance. But I'm not eating my Syngoniums. They are toxic, by the way, so be careful with that. With pets and with children, young children who wouldn't know any better and decide they want to start munching on your plants. I guess it could happen. But, so yeah. So what I do, I use Azamax, which is a liquid pesticide. I use it with my waterings, every watering since like June or July. I've been doing this. I've spent a fortune on the stuff. And then I also spray my plants down. And the newest thing I've actually been doing is I've made my own lavender spray. So it's a lavender essential oil mixed with water, and then you can mix it with like rubbing alcohol, witch hazel, or vodka. I personally have chosen the vodka. And I spray my plants, this plant, and this one lives in my bedroom, by the way, not in this room. And this one I spray in the afternoons. I spray all the plants in there because pretty much all of my Syngoniums have been affected by the spider mites this year. And so because they sit in front of a southeast facing window in the afternoon, there's not harsh light on them, so I can spray them. Like these guys here are under grow lights, so I have to either spray it once the lights go out or before the lights turn on. But yeah, I feel like I'm going like way off topic, or like, I don't know, I'm over there somewhere. But yeah, I think, what are we talking about? Spider mites? Okay, so as annoying as spider mites can be, it's not enough to deter me from keeping Syngoniums in my collection because I just love them so much. And I am of the understanding that I will always probably be battling spider mites, but it just goes along with keeping Syngonium. There are just some plants that are more prone to bugs. This I have found to be one of those plants. But it is worth it. It is still worth it for me to keep these plants because they're so beautiful and I just love them so much. And yeah, it's just part of it. Part of plant parenting. So, does that cover everything with pests? I think so. So let's move on to the next topic, which is propagating. Okay, so for this next topic, propagation, we are going to move out to the other room because I need more space because we are going to propagate together. So this whole stem here, this whole stem is going to be chopped off today. We're going to do that together. So these are so easy to propagate. And they're so much fun, and it's so rewarding, and they're so easy to grow new plants. So yeah, it's another thing that outweighs the bad, like the pests. It outweighs that. Just being able to so easily produce new plants, having new babies. So okay, let's move out there. All right, so we are all set up, ready to propagate this plant. And the nice thing about the Syngonium mojito is it's a very viney plant. See this long vine? There's different types of Syngoniums. So some of them, they want to vine like this. And then some of them, which I need to go grab, I forgot I was going to grab it, they are more of a clumping type of plant grower. So let me go grab my clumper and then we'll compare the two. Okay, so this is Syngonium Maria, which, by the way, Lynn, here is my Syngonium Maria. I know you've been wanting to see it for a while now. There she is. She's a wild grower. Curious if yours is wild like that. So this one is what I think is just more, it grows in more of a clump rather than wanting to have like a single vine going out like this. See what I mean? How it's kind of clumpy. Although I have discovered that over time, with maturity, these plants eventually, they'll start like drooping down, like trailing down, and that'll make them easier to propagate. But when it's a younger plant and it's a clumpy plant like this, it's a little more difficult to get in there for propagating. So Syngonium Maria for you, Lynn. And then, all right, so here is our viner, our super easy to propagate plant, the Syngonium mojito. Okay, So the stem we're going to be propagating on this plant is this one right here, this whole piece right here. And the reason I'm choosing this one is because it's starting to get a bit top heavy here, and I just have a feeling at some point the stem here is going to break. It'll split, and I'll have to propagate this one anyway, whereas this one here is going up already. And if I try to stake this one, it's just kind of awkward. So I'm just going to chop it. We're just going to chop it up. We're going to propagate this plant. So yeah, that's why we're choosing this one. So I am going to make my cut way down here. Way down there. And eventually we'll get a new growth point coming out of there. And we'll take the place of this one we're chopping off. So let's cut it. Just gonna chop it right there. All right, so this is what we're working with. This whole stem here. Okay, so as you can see, we have some aerial roots, a little bit of aerial roots here right at the node area. So, and this node right here goes with this leaf right here. So I am going to cut this plant right above that leaf, like right there. So that will be our first cut. So here's our first propagation. So I do have my soil set up here, right here, and I have my little cups to put them in, and that's what we're gonna do. But I'm gonna go ahead and cut up all of these right now. And I want to let them callus over because it's just good practice to let that stem callus before you plant it, just to prevent any sort of stem rotting from bacteria. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll pot them up together. So while we're waiting for our little cuttings here to callus over, I saw Nora showed up here. And for my Nora lovers out there, I thought I would show you guys her. Nora. I was hoping she'd turn around. Maybe she'd come over and visit. Or we can go to her. But also, another thing I did while we're waiting for these to callus over, it's probably been about, probably 15 minutes so far. So I also went to the sink because I told you guys I've been dealing with spider mites with my Syngoniums. And once I get these guys planted, they're going to be going into my grow tent. And I don't want to take the chance of introducing spider mites into the grow tent. So I took all these guys to the sink, ran them under a really heavy stream of water to knock off any spider mites that might be on them. I did look before I did that, and I did not see any spider mites whatsoever on this plant, but just to be safe, better safe than sorry. So these are all cleaned off. They're shiny wet from being cleaned off. So yeah, so that's something else I did. And even if when you're propagating your Syngoniums, if you're not having an issue with spider mites, it's still always good practice to take here she comes. Hi, you come over here? Come and say hello? Yeah. Here she is. Here's our girl. Not too happy about that, Poor girl. Okay, you can go. So as I was saying, when you are propagating your plants, it's always a good idea, especially, I guess more so if you're moving them, your propagations, into an area where they're going to be with other plants. They're not going to be like isolated. Clean them off just to be certain you're not going to be introducing any pests to your non-pest plants. So yeah, okay. It's been about 15 minutes and I think I'm going to wait a little bit longer. Still looking a little bit wet at those cuts. Some of them, not all of them. So yeah, so when we get back, when this is done and we're back, we'll start potting them up. So in case you guys are wondering what I am doing, I'm waiting for these to dry out where my cuts are, the fresh cuts. And I figured, well, if I just like get some airflow on them, it will help to dry out those cuts quicker so we can start planting them. So that's what I'm doing. And I have no idea if it will even make a bit of difference, but you know, theoretically it should. They're looking pretty good. So that's one of the cuts, one of the props. I will just fan them a little bit longer and then we are going to pot these up. Okay, so I think we are good to go. It's been about 25 minutes, maybe 25 minutes. And I think my little technique here really helped us. So we're ready to go. So now I am going to be propagating into soil. You could also put these right into water. Syngoniums propagate well in water. They propagate well in soil. Sphagnum moss. I've never tried perlite, but I'm sure they would do well in perlite. And even I'm sure they would do well in pond. So, but my choice, my favorite is soil. So yeah, so I have my little cup. This is a little like 3-inch. And I like using these clear see-through pots so I can keep an eye on those roots growing. And yeah, so I have my soil right down here. Gonna fill it up. And it's a nice chunky, very nice chunky mix to give lots of air to those roots, but also retain moisture for these plants, which they love. And then in addition, I also have some rooting hormone to dip these into. I don't always use the rooting hormone, but it doesn't hurt. And I don't know, I haven't really like seen a difference, really. You know, I can't tell the difference, but supposedly it's supposed to help. So we're just doing it. So we got some drippy rooting hormone on there. This one's a liquid one. I also have used a powdery one, which works well also. So I am just going to dig myself a little hole in here and I'm gonna pot it right in there. And our new growth is gonna come out between the leaf petiole and the main stem. So just plopping it right in there. And that is it. That is our first propagation. So more than likely we will lose this leaf eventually. This one is going to most likely die off. Not always, it doesn't always happen, but most of the time these leaves die off. And then you get your new growth. So there's number 1. Let's do some more. I have 7. I ended up with 7 cuttings. 7 beautiful cuttings. And this is our top cut from that stem. So you have 2 leaves on this one and another one on the way. So most likely we'll lose this leaf, but we'll see. Maybe not. You never know. Get ourselves a little rooting hormone. Dig our hole. And I just use a chopstick, a metal chopstick. Works great. One of my very favorite tools for this hobby. I use it all the time. And plop it right in. Fill in the hole. And number 2. So cute. Got a little rooting hormone on me. Okay, so these are my 7 propagations. They're all done. So the only thing I need to do now is take them to the sink and water them really thoroughly, get it totally soaked, and then these are going to go into my grow tent. So it's best when you do something like this, when you propagate directly into soil, it's so much better to make sure you put these into a really high humidity environment. That will help these roots to grow so fast. Syngoniums are really fast growers. They're just super fast growers. And when you propagate them, they propagate, like they grow those roots really fast. They start putting out stems really fast. They are just amazing, amazing plants. So if you don't have a grow tent or a cabinet, like an IKEA cabinet, you can just stick one of these, stick it right into like a plastic Ziploc, one of the big gallon size or bigger plastic Ziploc bags, and just try to keep that moisture. You want to try and keep as much moisture in with the plant as you possibly can. And then, as I said, this will be thoroughly soaked, thoroughly wet, and then keep it wet for like 4 weeks. Just make sure it doesn't dry out. And that's all there is to it. And we have 7 new babies here that I'm almost 99.9% certain each one of these is going to take, is going to work. So yeah, that is propagating Syngonium mojito. So that is going to be it for this edition of the plant care series. I hope you enjoyed learning a bit more about the Syngonium mojito. It's quite a bit smaller than when we started out, I would say. But just think of all those babies in the future to come. It's pretty exciting. I just love propagating, so much fun. And eventually, if you watched this video and you've decided, hey, I want a Syngonium mojito in my collection, eventually those babies we propagated together will be in my shop, which is thepinktrellis.com. If you didn't know, I have a shop where I sell plants and pottery. And yeah, so check that out. And get your Syngonium mojito from me eventually. I don't know, how long will it take? We're in October, November, December, January. I'll probably wait until the spring, early spring, maybe late February, early March. I don't know, we'll see. But if you can wait that long, you can get your Syngonium mojito from me. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. I hope I ignited a spark, a love for Syngonium in you, in case you didn't have that already. Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for being here every week. I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.